Welcome back to Face the Nation. We want to pick up where we left off with RNC Chairwoman Ronna McDaniel. Chairwoman, you met with the former president this week in Florida. Do you think he's going to run again in 2024?
You know, I don't know. That's going to be a decision he's going to have to make down the road. I do know he's committed to helping us win back majorities in 2022, which is, of course, what I'm focused on right now. We are a handful of seats away from taking back the House. We picked up 15 this last election and 1 seat away from taking back the Senate. And as I said, as we're seeing the Trump administration and their legacy being stripped away by Joe Biden, who said he was going to run in a bipartisan way, work with Republicans. He hasn't done that on anything, including this recent boondoggle of a stimulus bill of $2 trillion of grab bags for Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. You're seeing more and more Republicans recognize we need to unite around how do we win back these majorities and stop Biden in his tracks.
How damaging were the events of January 6th to your party?
They were damaging to our country. I think it was horrific what happened January 6th. There is no American, Republican or Democrat who looks at that and sees our Capitol attacked and feels good. And I think there's a lot of self-reflection that has to go on across the whole country.
Has the president done some self-reflection?
I'm going to talk about me because I'm not going to speak for somebody else, but I will say...
Well, you said he didn't meet the moment previously.
Well, what I will say from an RNC perspective is we've been more vocal in denouncing groups like QAnon. We know that anarchists came to Washington that day. There was a bomb placed outside of my building, outside of the Republican National Committee. We have a deeply divided nation. I will do that. I will denounce extreme elements that pretend to be Republican and say we do not want you in our party. I would like Democrats to do the same with Antifa and groups that are anti-Semitic that masquerade as Democrats and say you are not welcome in our party as they burn down cities this past summer. I would ask the media, be more fair in how you report things. Don't suppress reports on Hunter Biden and on Democrats like what's happening with Andrew Cuomo and the immense failures that he had as governor, and then highlight things like you just did with Governor Nome. Andrew Cuomo, what he has done, his policies.
When he agrees to come on this program, trust me, he won't like some of my questions. Like many of our guests don't like my questions.
I hope so, but the media as a whole has ignored Andrew Cuomo.
About Congresswoman, to your point you were just raising, though, about being more vocal and speaking out. Congresswoman Liz Cheney said this week that the Trump supporters who violently sieged the Capitol on January 6th, she raised this particular issue.
It's very important, especially for us as Republicans, to make clear that we aren't the party of white supremacy.
Will you make that clear now?
100%. We passed a resolution unanimously from the RNC members 3 years ago saying we condemn white supremacy, anti-Semitism, KKK, and I'm going to add QAnon to that. They are not welcome in our party. I have not seen Democrats do that with Louis Farrakhan, who calls the Jewish people termites. I have not seen them do that with Antifa.
The people who sieged the Capitol were carrying Trump flags. That is why Liz Cheney was talking about it. It is why she voted to impeach the president.
The Democrats have created a safe haven for Antifa. They have not denounced them. Nancy Pelosi said as cities were being ripped apart, people will do what they do. You can't hold Republicans to one standard and not Democrats, and that creates unrest as well.
Well, when it comes to Republicans, I know you have focused on recruiting women back to the party. Is Marjorie Taylor Greene, who was a QAnon supporter, who was described by Mitch McConnell as a cancer on the Republican Party, is she representative of the kind of Republican woman you want?
Well, you know, I've been very vocal about her comments. She apologized for them. I'm glad to see that she did, and her district will decide that. But we have increased women. We're now at 38 women in Congress in the Republican Party. That's the highest we've ever had. And here's the other thing. Women are suffering under the Biden administration. 2.4 million women have lost their jobs because of daycare issues, 140,000 last month. Women are going through a she-cession. Women are struggling because our kids are not back in school. I'm not saying this as a Republican. I'm saying this as a mother with 2 kids in public school, watching this rip apart my community as kids are suffering. So get it done. Get our kids back in school. And that's what the Republican Party stands for. It's Florida versus New York. Our kids can go back to school safely. Our businesses can be open. And that's how we'll get women back in our party when they see us fighting for their kids and for them and not standing up for unions.
Ronna McDaniel, thank you for your time today. Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger broke with his party and voted to impeach President Trump back in January, and he joins us this morning from Capitol Hill. Good morning to you, Congressman.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning.
So we just, we're spending a lot of time talking about your party today, which I know you're spending a lot of time thinking about the future. When the former president takes the stage at CPAC, he is expected to say, according to an excerpt of the speech that's been released, that the Republican Party is united. Is the Republican Party united?
No, I think there's, I mean, we may be united in some areas. You know, we don't have to agree with everything the Biden administration is doing, so there'll be opposition, so unity in some of that. But I think in terms of what is our vision for the future, certainly not united. I think we are a party that's been, for too long, peddling in fear, using fear as a compelling way to get votes, and fear does motivate. But after a while, fear can destroy a country, it can destroy narratives, and it can destroy a democracy. And we have to quit peddling that. And I think what you're going to hear from the president at CPAC today is self-congratulations, no ability to recognize the fact that we have lost the House, the Senate, and the presidency because of Donald Trump, and you're going to see a lot of fear.
You just heard the chairwoman of your party, though, say that she met with the former president with the intention of having him help win back the House and the Senate. So she's believing that he's a force to bring people to the Republican Party.
Well, I think he is. I mean, I think certainly he's got, a number of people that follow him and are motivated by him and compelled by him because there's been no competing alternative vision. You know, to win a narrative in a party, you have to present a competing alternative narrative when you only hear from Donald Trump. And when people walk around in fear of his tweets or his comments, or they use his fear to peddle win re-election, of course he's going to motivate people. But that's where when I launched countryfirst.com with a 1ST, that's all about fighting for the narrative in the Republican Party for an optimistic, brighter future again, one we can be proud of, and one where when we talk about things, we actually teach young people how to do politics in a way that we used to remember and appreciate.
You're talking there about the Political Action Committee that you have founded. So that's part of what I was talking about earlier with some infighting. I mean, how are you going to pick candidates? Is there anyone you see, for instance, in the Senate right now? We know Minority Leader McConnell said there are at least 4 senators he has that are going to run for president. Any of them have the kind of vision you're calling for?
Not that I've seen, I don't know who these senators are that are going to run. There are a few that I really do appreciate in the Senate. You think of like Ben Sasse, of course, Mitt Romney, Lisa Murkowski, those that voted to remove the president particularly, because I think they did it at great personal cost. That shows leadership. There are people in the House, of course. Liz Cheney, with her strength and ability to stand up in front of a tough crowd and tell the truth. That's what America needs more of. They need more of truth telling. They need more of out of fear and presenting light into darkness. And we have to start with our own party. We can point fingers at the Democrats, sure, but it's not going to do any good. Every party, but now especially the Republican Party, has to look inside after January 6th and say, what have we become? What's our great history? And how do we go forward from here? And I'll tell you, reaching out to Donald Trump and more of the same is not going to do that.
You spend some time thinking about foreign policy, so I want to ask you as well. Are you disappointed that just like President Trump, President Biden did not take direct action against Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for his role in approving the murder of Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi?
So I don't want to say I'm disappointed it didn't take direct action. I think, he needs to be held accountable. I think publicly talking about this is very important because the Saudi Crown Prince responds to public shaming, and I think there has to be some behind-the-scenes accountability. But keep in mind, once we start basically pushing and picking sides and all this, it's a very complicated area. We have to show deep moral clarity, but be very careful in how we go forward, because especially in the Middle East, things are really complicated.
They are, but, this is a person who is a U.S. resident. Should you expect more from a U.S. president in forcing consequences for murder and dismemberment?
Yeah, and look, I don't think that this chapter's done. I think, public accountability is important, and I think there will be some things that we might find out later. It's not going to be like military action or anything, but other areas, whether it's economics or targeted sanctions, stuff like that, that will come out either publicly or behind the scenes in the future. I don't think this chapter's written yet.
Okay, like the halt that's being considered on offensive weapons sales. You would support that?
Sure. Yeah, I think I'd have to look at all the details of it, but I think certainly there has to be accountability for this.
All right, Congressman Kinzinger, thank you for your time today.
You bet. See ya.
We'll be right back. We want to take a closer look now at one state's efforts to get teachers vaccinated and get children back to in-person learning. Kentucky Democratic Governor Andy Beshear joins us this morning from Frankfort. Good morning to you.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I know you set March 1st as the recommended deadline for schools to reopen, and those teachers who haven't gotten their second dose might be able to wait a little longer, but you have pushed them to the front of the line ahead of other essential workers so that they could get those shots. How politically difficult was it to do that?
Well, in Kentucky, we determined that we needed to prioritize both our present, those that were suffering the most and most likely to die from COVID, as well as our future, getting our children back in school. Now, I'm not just a governor, I'm also a dad of a middle schooler and an elementary school student. And so I've seen the impacts that this had. So we pushed our teachers to the front of the line, moving them up faster than the CDC or other states had. And we're about to be the first state to fully vaccinate all of our educators. We have all but about 7 school districts already back in some form of in-person. Those districts are going to expand. And now we have a commitment from all our remaining districts to get that done too. It's important we do it in a safe way that also builds confidence within our educators themselves.
I ask you how politically difficult it was because I often hear from governors that they can't prioritize teachers over other essential workers. The allegation often is having to do with fear of unions. Did the fact that you are a right-to-work state, one where union membership is not compulsory, did that make a difference?
No, I don't think so. We have strong associations for our teachers, but the way we look at this is everything's difficult in COVID. Even the concept of what's an essential worker, is one person more essential than another? For us, this was a workforce issue. It was development for our children, scholastically, emotionally, and socially. And it was about getting back to some form of normal while we are still very careful. We made this call early on. We stuck to it. And no matter what you decide during COVID, some are going to oppose it. But it's about trying to do the right thing, the best thing for your people, and then to let the consequences be what they'll be.
Kentucky ranks 29th among states on vaccine rollout, according to the CDC. That's for your general population. Why are you lagging, and will the Johnson & Johnson supply make a difference?
Well, we don't think that we're lagging. There are different ways that people look. I understand. There are different ways that you judge the numbers. That's first and second dose together. We believe that we have to be as fast as possible with the first dose to get people some level of immunity. And as of last week, we had used 98.5% of all the first doses provided. But we think differently on the second dose. That is meant for a very specific person. And so we made the decision that if it takes a little longer to get it to them, then we were going to make sure it gets to them. But what I can say is that all around the country, we see capacity and efficiency picking up every day. Johnson & Johnson is going to be a game changer. The fact that we can fully vaccinate everyone in just one shot, that it basically eliminates death and serious illness, and that we're going to get tens of thousands of additional vaccines per week, per state. It's just going to get us to the finish line that much faster. We're really excited about it here in Kentucky. The more vaccine you can send us, the better.
You're a Democrat, and since we've heard from a number of Republicans about the infighting within their party, I need to ask you about the infighting within yours. West Virginia's Senator Joe Manchin, who is a Democrat in a red state, told us after the election that, quote, the radical part of the Democratic Party scared the bejesus out of rural voters in 2020. Do you believe that the progressive wing of your party is out of touch?
Oh, I believe our party, like others, have lots of different people with lots of different views, but the ability to discuss those in a way where we don't make enemies out of one another is what's so important inside our party or for our country at large. And people are passionate about the views they have, but we also have to be respectful of one another to make sure that what brings us together isn't who we dislike, but it's what we stand for. And so when those debates are occurring, if they're actually on issues, then we're moving in the right direction, even if there is disagreement on those issues. I'm highly concerned that what is bringing too many people together in our country is who they dislike and not what they actually stand for.
The Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, from your state, criticized this COVID relief bill that President Biden is putting together and which just passed the House. He's called it deliberately partisan, actively harmful to America's recovery. How much do you need this money, and is it a mistake for President Biden to muscle this through with only Democratic support?
I can tell you that every county judge executive and every mayor across Kentucky, whether Democrat, Republican, or independent, they'll tell you they desperately need this assistance. That COVID has hit especially our localities in deeply impactful ways, and that this gives us the ability to make up for some of that harm. On the state level, this gives us an opportunity to stimulate our economy while not having to borrow and go into debt. It's what every economist, at least on the state level, would tell you is exactly where we should be. Let's use the dollars to create jobs, to provide relief, and to shorten this recession. And right now, we've got a decision to make. You know, are we going to be FDR or are we going to be Herbert Hoover? Do we want to make the decisions to get us out of this recession more quickly, which benefits every family, Democrat or Republican? But you got to be bold to do that, and you can't worry about credit, whether it happens under a Democratic president or a Republican president. In the midst of a pandemic, can't we put that aside for just a little bit and help all our families out there? I hope so.
Yeah, the last few were bipartisan. That's kind of the argument this time around. But Governor, we have to leave it there. Thank you for joining us. For more of the challenges teaching during this pandemic, listen to our latest edition of Facing Forward. I spoke with Khan Academy founder Sal Khan. You can listen and subscribe on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. We'll be right back. We go now to former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb, who's on the board of Pfizer as well as Illumina, and he joins us from Westport, Connecticut. Good morning. Dr. Gottlieb, you heard Dr. Fauci say a few million doses of this new J&J vaccine should be available. Would you take it?
I would. I think this is a good vaccine. They'll ship about 4 million doses this week. The vaccine was very effective at preventing severe disease, 85% effective at preventing severe and critical disease. Also, interestingly, if you look at the clinical data, it was 74% effective at preventing asymptomatic infection, which is a suggestion that it's preventing transmission as well, which is really what all the vaccines are starting to demonstrate in the data that's being accrued. There is more and more evidence that these vaccines are preventing transmission of infection, which makes them an even more important public health tool. But the data was quite strong with the J&J vaccine. I think people should be confident about taking it. It will be in the market this week.
Dr. Fauci said there are worrisome variants in New York and California and said that may be partly why they're seeing some stalling happening with this trajectory that had otherwise been headed downward. What do you think? Are we being set back?
Well, I think this stalling could be explained by just increased mobility. If you look at Google mobility data, people are moving around more. I don't think that the New York variant, which is called 1526, is really having much of an impact yet. It represents about 9% of the infections in New York City, so it's still small. It's going to increase. This strain actually started to become prevalent as early as the summer. It was first introduced into the summer, so it really probably didn't explain the surge that we've seen. There's two different lineages of this variant, so two different forms of the variant. One of them has the same mutation that's in the South African variant, and that's the one we're more concerned about. That represents about 5% of infections in New York. So we're more worried about the New York strain because it may pierce prior immunity and vaccines may be less effective against that, and it's still very speculative. With respect to the Los Angeles variant, people are a little less concerned about that. It may be more transmissible, but it doesn't seem to have that 484K mutation, that mutation that we found in the South African variant that seems to make vaccines a little less effective and seems to allow people who've been infected before to get reinfected. So we're more concerned about the New York variant, but again, I don't think these variants are explaining what we're seeing right now, with the exception maybe of South Florida and Southern California, where 117 is becoming prevalent, and that may be causing a backup in Florida and Southern California right now. When should we expect booster shots? I think we're going to get boosters in the fall. And, there's studies right now underway by Moderna and Pfizer, the company I'm on the board of, looking at a third booster of the existing vaccines. And they'll also be looking at new variant vaccines that they're going to put into development and see which are more effective. I think the reality is that we have time to get a better toolbox for the fall to take care of these variants that we're seeing emerge and develop vaccines that can cover them. But, you will probably be getting boosters in the fall for people who are getting vaccinated right now.
I want to ask you about Governor Noem, who spoke on this program, saying she never focused, she told CPAC she never focused on case numbers. She focused on hospital capacity. And she rejected the premise that the motorcycle rally that she held in her state in August was responsible for seeding the Midwest outbreak. What do you make of her defense?
Well, look, I think it is important to look at the vulnerable population and hospital capacity and how many people are being hospitalized and dying from the infection as an important metric. But you also have to look at prevalence. Certainly back when we were having the first and the second and even the third wave of infection, prevalence was an important predictor of overall morbidity from the infection before we had a vaccine. If you look at post-July 1st, and the reason why I picked July 1st is because before July 1st, we really didn't know how to treat COVID. We were treating it literally with Pepcid and hydroxychloroquine. But after July 1st, we had the data from the UK study, the recovery trial, that told us that dexamethasone, the steroid, was very effective at cutting mortality. We started to use blood thinners on patients. We were intubating less aggressively. So practice of medicine dramatically improved after around that time period. If you look at post-July 1st, in terms of deaths per capita by state, South Dakota is the last. Arizona is second to last. Mississippi, Alabama, North Dakota, those are the states that come in last in the nation in terms of deaths per capita. So, I think that the states that didn't implement as stringent measures, they did pay a price for it. And I don't think that you can explain that away. I think it's just a fact. And, they will argue that they maybe didn't take the same economic hit as states that imposed restrictions, but they did pay a price for it in terms of higher death rates.
Dr. Gottlieb, thank you for your perspective, as always. We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.